You've probably seen clips circulating online of people playing a horror game and then getting jump scared to the point where they break their screen or fall off their chair. But what makes games scary? Is it just a jump scare, or is there more to it? And why do we choose to play games that we know will give us anxiety or fear? Hi, I am Matt Smilix and I'm a psychologist who loves horror games. So today we are discussing what makes horror games so scary and why we play them anyway. You are playing a scary game. This could be Dead Space 2, where you just arrived at the one nasty eye operation scene. You, or your character Isaac, lay down on the operating table and, before you know it, you have to stick a needle in your eye. In order to fully experience this horror, you need to feel immersed. Immersion can happen through different means, but Torben Grodal created a model of the basics in order to experience immersion. This model is named the PECMA model, and it was originally created for movies, but it can be used for video games as well. PECMA stands for Perception, Emotion, Cognition, and Motor Activation. When you play a game or watch a movie, you are perceiving images and sounds which create emotional reactions. You think and interpret what is happening, and your body prepares for action. For example, when there is a sudden loud noise, you can experience fear, which makes you think, "Oh my god, what the hell?" making you flinch. This is important because that fearful emotion is obviously a big part of what makes a horror game scary. Immersion can be created by using a multitude of game aspects. One of them is the narrative. Horror games typically have an intrinsic narrative plot in which the protagonist, antagonist, and location interact with each other. This speaks for itself. You, as the main character, fight off enemies to get to the big final boss, all while traversing through a suspenseful location. The atmosphere is part of what makes a horror game good. Every visual or auditory element can trigger feelings in your body such as fear, disgust, and even excitement. This atmosphere is created using lighting, shadows, sound effects, music, and so on, all to create an eerie atmosphere and to add to the narrative. There are three key elements to create this ambience: lighting, sound, and aesthetic. Light can be used to create shadows, which can create a suspenseful atmosphere based on the unknown. The player is forced to take a closer look to make out every detail, sensitizing them to possible jump scares. Limited lighting can create a sense of powerlessness because the player cannot control what they see, so their lack of accurate knowledge builds extra tension. Sound can create nervousness based on anticipation. Sound has the ability to tap into emotional responses in a way that is powerful and sometimes very subtle. An example of this is the sound of a fast heartbeat in stressful moments. Games can also use sound cues as a way to warn the player that something is going to happen. Phasmophobia does this very well. They use ghost sounds to indicate that a hunt is about to start, yet the sounds are very similar to a ghost event, which in turn makes ghost events a bit stressful as well. A similar element is added in Alien Isolation, where the motion sensor beeping is used as an auditory warning. Regarding aesthetics, it can be a lot more than just the overall atmosphere in the game. Sometimes games will incentivize you to play with headphones and/or in the dark. This leads to the immersion unfolding in real life. People also claim to feel more immersed when they have a sense of autonomy in the game, such as being able to choose which items you carry around and which ones you leave behind. However, most horror games give a sense of powerlessness as opposed to agency. There are horror games that lack combat, and all you can do is run away or hide. This inability to fight back can create a feeling of impotence and stress. In addition, many horror games like Amnesia and Phasmophobia employ depleting health or sanity as an extra sense of urgency. This mechanic further incentivizes you to flee or to hide from dangerous situations to preserve resources, which feeds into the growing sense of helplessness. Regarding items, most horror games lack health and ammunition. In certain games such as Resident Evil 4, you can buy ammunition, weapons, and supplies. The cost of these items is usually pretty high, so the player has to weigh the odds of which items are the most necessary at the time. Although this can create some autonomy, the scarcity in items can create extra stress for players. It can give the impression of being unprepared. One part of immersion is also perspective. The perspective in which we play horror games can affect how scary they are to us. Playing in first person can be very engaging and immersive. We get to see through the eyes of our character, and this can increase our connection to the avatar. However, playing in third person has its advantages. The third body perspective can create some sort of extended body. You may feel more affected when you see the body of the character acting and being acted upon. This third-person perspective can activate your mirror neurons. In short, mirror neurons are brain cells that get activated when you see a person doing something, have something happen to them, or experience a certain emotion. A classic example is seeing someone yawn, which triggers you to yawn as well. Another example is when you see a video of someone falling down pretty badly and you feel your own body tense up as if you feel their pain. Your brain produces an emotional reaction to the sight of seeing someone else in pain. Besides pain, it can also make you feel things like disgust. For example, when James from Silent Hill 2 had to stick his hand in a dirty toilet. Your mirror neurons are activated, making you experience the same emotion. Horror games aren't just scary because of the immersive experience, but also because of the way we, as players, have to play the game. Narratively speaking, there are two ways in which a game can instill fear in us: threat assessment and threat negotiation. People who feel threatened are motivated to assess those threats in order to either avoid them or prepare for them. They do so by vigilantly scanning their environment for cues of danger. This is threat assessment. Games like Amnesia: The Dark Descent and Silent Hill 2 use this gameplay mechanic a lot. Players have to explore dangerous settings to discover which monsters are lurking in the dark and what kinds of threats these enemies represent. Some threats must be overcome by escaping or fighting. Your heart starts to race and glucose is released into the bloodstream to give you an instant energy fix. Your pupils dilate to take in as much information and your attention is sharpened. You feel adrenaline pumped for chase sequences such as in Outlast, where you must outrun homicidal maniacs in a secluded asylum. This is threat negotiation. You have to decide if you're gonna fight or flight. Survival horror games accentuate threat assessment. These games are about traversing dangerous environments while evading their dangers and about building an atmosphere of vulnerability and anxious tension that prompts the player to stay vigilant. In contrast, the typical action horror game such as Dead Space accentuates threat negotiation. These games stage dynamic confrontations with dangerous antagonists such as infight and chase sequences. Both threat assessment and negotiation can add to the immersion. When players successfully resist a monster, it increases their experience of immersion and can also increase their fear. When players are only able to run away, they can experience helplessness and a lack of control, which again increases their fear. Outlast is a perfect example of a game that switches between threat assessment, such as stealthy exploration, and threat negotiation, such as chase sequences. The shift into these two modes is usually signaled by music. The music can change from anxious to fearful, dynamic threat negotiation through the use of sharp, loud noises. The shift in gameplay is also visible in how the player has to move around. Instead of the deliberate button presses that mediate the player's movement during stealthy exploration, the chase sequences call for frantically coordinated controls to implement the player's split-second decisions about how best to escape. Another aspect that makes horror games more terrifying than horror movies is the use of ludic elements such as the game design mechanics, play conditioning, and the coding of the game. Video games are able to physically interact with players to create an experience that compels the body to mirror the fear on screen through haptic game design mechanics. Horror games also condition players to play them in a specific way to create heightened tension and take away control. The coding of horror games can create obstacles that take away autonomy, and it creates the atmospheric environments of fear. Fear is created when developers combine atmosphere, visuals, and sound with buttons coded to specific in-game actions and a vibrating controller. We control the character through button presses. This may be with a controller, but also on your keyboard. Our actions influence the character and the game. Alien Isolation does this incredibly well. They use AI coding to create an antagonist that maintains tension by reacting to the player's actions. Horror in horror games can be explained by the effect theory. The effect theory explores how interactive elements create intense emotions by directly impacting the player's mind and body. The effect theory continues by stating that we produce actions and reactions based on those stimuli. This happens through such game mechanics which trigger a fight or flight response in the players. Resident Evil 2 Remake can serve as a perfect example for this. You are walking through the halls of an abandoned police station that is filled with not only zombies of your past colleagues, but also lickers. Monsters that can't see but will react to noise. You have a choice. You either use a lot of bullets and make a lot of noise to try and take it out, or you walk past it, quietly, not a peep, because one wrong move and you are dead. This creates tension. In horror games, our emotional state is used to manipulate or adapt to a scenario. We as players manipulate the controller and we approach the gameplay causing our body to mediate the elements of horror to enrich our experience. Just like you do walking past a liquor. You feel suspense, you walk slower, you hold your finger ready on the trigger button. Players feel fear and react accordingly. So, one of the most effective ways horror games affect players is through ludic mechanics and haptic inputs. There is a literal physical interface of the player with the controller. The player controls what happens on screen through the controller or keyboard. Games emphasize this bodily connection to the screen by making the controller vibrate whenever something happens. This creates a physical bond between the avatar and the player. A great example of this is the game Until Dawn, which requires the player to hold the controller completely still when hiding from a monster. I couldn't find any research on this, but recently, some games have also started using your microphone. Games like Phasmophobia and Fear the Phantom use your microphone to detect sounds coming from you, the player, making it so that you need to be quiet when getting attacked or when hiding. It's a game design that adds extra fear and immersion. So far, we have mainly talked about immersion and how crucial that is for a horror game. Following the PECMA model, perception is very important, and there is one horror subgenre that does this very, very well. And that is body horror. A 2009 study states that survival horror games are an extended body genre because gamers become one with the game character in both performance and perception, which increases the immersive experience. Body horror games push players to act and feel with the character. Body horror utilizes themes of mutation, infection, etc. to play on resentment towards the human form. The aesthetic is often shown by zombie infections, mutilation, and body metamorphosis. The Resident Evil franchise is a pretty good example of body horror. In the first Resident Evil game, one of the very first things you see once you enter the Spencer mansion is a zombie hunched over a dead body, eating it. Resident Evil 4, for example, follows Leon in a remote village in Spain where he meets villagers who are infected by the Las Plagas. These are not the type of zombies he knows from Resident Evil 2. The villagers are faster and are able to strategize. Leon himself gets infected by the Plagas as well. This metamorphosis introduces body horror right away. The remake of the game is also not shy of showing bloody and mutated corpses. Resident Evil is also known for their gross transformations when it comes to the bosses. They usually have a human form to start with and then they morph into something unrecognizable. Dead Space is another game franchise that utilizes a lot of body horror. For example, in the Dead Space 1 remake, the necromorphs are modeled in layers of bones, muscles, tendons, and skin. So, depending on which layer you see, you know how much damage you've done and how much is left. Being immersed in such an experience while possibly seeing the most disgusting things on your screen can create a sense of discomfort and fear. Horror games affect us on a physical and emotional level. Emotionally, suspense leads to feelings of fear, and for some even being terrified. A 2013 study found that heart rate is the strongest predictor for subjective feelings of fear. A 2012 study found that games that raise anxiety sensitize players to danger. They prime players to experience fear when it is prompted by the game. A perfect example of priming is using certain music to alert the player that danger is nearby. I'm sure every Legend of Zelda player gets a stress response when they hear this tune. How we respond to horror games and how much we enjoy them is also a little bit dependent on our personality. A 2018 study used certain personality traits to measure this. The traits used were sensation-seeking, imagination or intellect, extraversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and emotional stability. Sensation-seeking is a desire for varied, novel, complex, and intense feelings and experiences. It is related to enjoying horror media, and people who score high on this trait experience less fear in VR. Intellect and imagination describes people who are intelligent, cultured, imaginative, and creative. It is associated with enjoyment of horror, being easily scared, and using more horror, especially terrifying material. Extraversion is correlated with using horror more, but preferably with others. They also feel more afraid when experiencing horror with other people. Agreeableness is correlated with being easily scared. They also prefer to experience horror media with others, but they feel less scared when surrounded by other people. Conscientious people tend to feel less afraid after using horror. These are the people who can watch a horror movie and go straight to sleep. Emotionally stable people are less easily scared and, same as conscientious people, feel less fear afterwards. Sensation seekers and people who are intelligent and imaginative like horror because it can create an intellectual challenge. They don't just expect negative emotions, but also positive ones like trust and joy. Horror allows them to adapt and cope with simulated danger. Sensation seeking plays a big role since preferring horror tends to decline with age. The theory behind this is that sensation seeking tendencies peak in adolescence. This study also found a small negative correlation between education level and horror preference. This means that people with a higher education prefer horror less. The theory behind it is that highly educated people may tend to gravitate more towards genres with more cultural capital, because those genres can lead to more respect in their cultural circles. Our gender also affects how we use horror. Men tend to enjoy horror more and they use it more frequently. They also tend to have a greater preference for more frightening material and use horror more by themselves. Women tend to feel more easily scared and use horror more when accompanied by others. Regardless of gender, people are more scared when they consume horror alone. This could be because of evolutionary and maybe even biological systems. Horror stimulates the fear system, which increases vigilance, anxiety, and vulnerability when alone. One study created 4 categories to summarize the horror lovers. The first category is the enthusiastic horror user. They highly enjoy horror media and use it frequently. They tend to prefer intense horror and don't tend to be scared easily. They use horror more to experience joy, anticipation, and surprise. These people score higher on traits such as being imaginative, sensation-seeking, and they are more likely to believe in the paranormal. These people also have a tendency to be less educated. The second category is the social horror user. They have a preference to use horror with others because they enjoy it more that way. These people are more extroverted, agreeable, and they also tend to believe in the paranormal. This category mainly consists of women and they are somewhat more educated. The supernatural horror user has a preference for supernatural horror. They tend to believe in the paranormal and don't use horror to experience disgust or anger. The fearful horror user is defined by being easily scared while using horror media and after. They use horror specifically to feel afraid. These people tend to be women, agreeable, and emotionally stable. People who believe in the paranormal tend to seek out supernatural horror media. People who don't believe in the paranormal seek out more natural horror. This suggests that people seek out horror with threatening stimuli they perceive to be plausible. But why do we seek out horror in the first place? When we look at evolution, humans are a roaming and social species that have faced many and varied dangers over time. It is adaptive and even enjoyable to obtain information about which threats are out there and how we can deal with them. People have been exchanging this sort of information for decades through telling scary stories. These stories grab our attention and they stay in our memory for adaptive reasons. Horror games have the ability to offer a more involved or immersive experience than just telling stories. Through games, players have the opportunity to simulate danger and to even practice effective coping mechanisms. Horror games provide a safe experience with fear scenarios. You may feel genuine fear, but you're still in the safety of your own room. Horror games feature psychologically deep-seated scares and they instill methods for dealing with them both behaviorally and emotionally. So not only do we feel fear, games challenge us to overcome it. Now, horror games feature ancestral dangers and they let us experience it in a safe place. This can motivate us to choose horror games. They are engaging because they make such scares the core of a complete simulative system that promises a challenge of threat assessment and threat negotiation. Horror games combine dangerous threats with reward structures. When you overcome a challenge, you usually get rewarded with extra gear or items. The other side of this gamification is, of course, the removal of actual threat. We're not actually getting hurt while playing the games. Games also offer a customizable experience that allows players to choose how scary the game is. This can be done by choosing the difficulty, lowering or increasing the volume, and by choosing to play in virtual reality which changes the sensory immersion. In addition, players can also choose to quit whenever they want. This makes the experience of fear manageable for audiences with different tolerances to anxiety. If you're still watching, I know you love yourself a horror game every now and then. One subgenre I really love is liminality, like liminal spaces. If you're interested in why liminal spaces can cause discomfort or unease, I suggest you watch this video next. And if you want to see me play some horror games, I stream those regularly on Twitch, the link is in the description. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye!